Welcome to Information Matters, a television series that explores how people use information to make decisions, solve problems, innovate, and have fun. This series is brought to you by the University of Washington Information School, which studies information and its role in people's lives. In this program, we'll look at how NFL executives use information to build successful teams. The NFL Scouting Combine is one of the best sources of information about prospective players. Coaching staffs, medical personnel, and top executives from NFL teams evaluate some of the very best college football players during the annual 4-day event. Laura Schildkraut interviewed Tim Ruskell, general manager and president of football operations for the Seattle Seahawks, about the Scouting Combine and building a winning team. Laura talked first with Mike Eisenberg, dean emeritus of the University of Washington Information School, about how successful NFL teams collect, analyze, and use information.
In professional football, there's an event called the Combine. How does that work?
Well, the Combine brings players together who are eligible for the draft, who are interested in that, and they run those players through a set of fairly standardized tests. So there are speed tests and weight, how high they can jump, as well as a series of mental tests and things like that. And what they're trying to do is, in kind of a neutral setting, to get an assessment of how those players perform. And one of the reasons they bring them together is because if they're tested in local situations, there can be more variables at work there. So by bringing them together, they're able to, at least in theory, control some of that. Now, a given player may not perform that well at the Combine. Does that mean that there's a fundamental flaw or problem with that player, or they just had a bad day or something like that? And so that's why you've got to weigh the factors. And what you're trying to do is to eliminate the guesswork, eliminate the variability. You're looking for consistency. So a player that can run a 4.4, can they run a 4.4 over and over and over?
So for the NFL, the Combine is basically a job interview. How is that similar, and how does it differ from, let's say, a graduating student going out on their first job interview?
Well, how many job interviews involve taking a battery of tests? I mean, there are some, I don't just mean drug tests either on things, but some firms, Wall Street firms, for example, will put people through a battery of tests and what have you. And you go out on a job interview and they'll look for your resume and what you've done. But they don't have film of you performing in the classroom or doing things where they do here. And they don't ask you to come in and break apart every aspect of who and what you are. I guess it's more holistic. And don't get the NFL wrong. The NFL is doing holistic analysis as well. It's just so customized and focused and broken down from an information and a statistical basis and a performance basis. It's really quite extraordinary. And now that you mention it, if you think about it, it's probably the most intense job interview in the world that you can imagine. Probably more so than even any other professional sport.
So it's pretty easy to see how hard skills would be evaluated. How would you evaluate soft skills in this kind of a setting?
Well, they do administer a battery of problem-solving type tests and intelligence and those kinds of things. There's also situational things. You want to see how people react in different situations. But that's really why they don't just do things at the Combine. That's why they do look at their college records, their situational things. There are the various senior games that many of the players play in, and they want to see how that they stack up in real situations. So from an information perspective, what they'll do is they'll take the film, they call it film, it's really video, and they will break every play down and every situation, and they will put those into massive databases, video databases, that they can then sort and sift through. And they'll say, okay, let's take a look at this player in 15 of these situations and see how they perform. And so they'll be looking for quickness off the line, and are they able to adjust to different formations that they're facing and all different kind of things. And then they'll code that, and they'll analyze that information, put that into more databases, and then run that. So it gets very, very complicated. But the ultimate thing, we're trying to predict how are these players going to perform at the next level, the highest level, which is just a little faster and just a little stronger, and every player is a star or superstar from college, and how are they going to perform there both physically as well as mentally and emotionally. So, there's a mental, there's a quickness, there's a decision-making aspect, and every player has to coordinate together in decision-making, but every player has to perform both in terms of the physical side and, again, that emotional side. Is the emotion going to be a positive or a negative? And the mental side of the game as well. In football, more than almost any other sport, there's this constant interplay also among the players. How do they react together? Yes, they're all individuals, but they're ultimately a team. 11 players on every play reacting to 11 other players. One of the really interesting things about football is that every 25, 50 seconds, we stop and start. Well, let's try it again. New situation, new set of variables. We'll set it up. We'll put one defense against one offense. The defense is trying to camouflage what they're doing. You don't understand it. Our offense is trying to do something. The quarterback has to react and all this stuff. And we try it out. Bam. Okay, let's try it again. Now, some of the sports like basketball or soccer or something will criticize American football and say, there's all this stopping and starting, and what's that all about? And ours is a much more fluid sport. But there's a lot of dead time in soccer for a reason, because they can't work at that pace all the time. And even in a rugby match or something like that, it's quite different, even though it's more fluid than a football game. But a football game has so much information and mental aspects because of this constant setup and start. The coaches and the role of the coaches, there are more coaches in football than anything else, right? And you've got these guys at the top of the stadium watching down to see what the layout is and all these things. So football is a massively information-focused game that has such complexity, and that's why a lot of people find it so interesting, especially information guys like me.
Is it possible to have too much information?
I think we have too much information all the time. It's possible also to have so much information that we're confused about what it all means. And so yes, there's information overload. It's something we study in the information school a lot. And it can paralyze you. It can befuddle you. So what it takes is moving from information to knowledge. What are the key sets of variables that we're interested in? How do they compare to each other? So, and this teams learn over time, right? How important is speed over emotion? How is mental quickness versus a quarterback's mobility in terms of arm strength or something like that? And so the way we can handle information overload is by clustering and by prioritizing and adding value and simplifying that way. But there's no question that on the baseline, there is too much information. So again, that's the kind of thing that information professionals do and people that work with information is how do we aggregate, how do we cluster and organize, and how do we weigh, and it is relative. The information consultant's answer to everything is, it all depends. It all depends upon that original problem. Remember, back to the Big Six task definition, right? What's the problem? And how do the variables interact with each other? And what is the most important? So let's say the Seahawks have a chance to take a linebacker, again, to use that example, and one is clearly superior physically, right? And another, but has been known perhaps for some problems in terms of team chemistry and things like that. And you've got another that's a little less physically, but is really a good fit and team player. Which one do you take? Those kinds of decisions should not be made at the time that you're analyzing two players. Those kinds of decisions of prioritization should be made earlier. And that's why we sometimes say it's not about the technology and putting this stuff together. It's about the practices and the decision making and your priorities ahead of time.
So a team has now collected all their data and they figured out which are the players that they're going to try and get on draft day.
Right.
How do they handle the information as it starts to shift? Let's say that their player that they really wanted just got drafted by a team before them. How do they manage that, and how do they use information systems to do so?
Yeah. Well, it's a massive chess game, and they even have what they call the war rooms. And that's what they have. They have a war room set up. And so they've got the board, and they've got the computers and all the things set up, and they're talking. They're also on the phone. It gets even more complex. There are teams that may be calling us because what they want to do is to trade with us even as the draft is unfolding, because now they're worried about a certain player that they thought they were going to get down where they are, but they may not, and they really want that player. So it's a very, very fluid and constant thing. The biggest way the teams deal with it is by scenarios, that they have worked out so many different combinations and different scenarios. But they will tell you that even in spite of that, something unusual will happen. But it's like a massive chess match. It's a massive war situation. And it's fascinating. There have been some TV shows that you can watch that show the inside of the war room on draft day and how that unfolds. You know, there's a certain time frame. You've got to get to that podium at a certain time. If you don't, you've lost your draft choice, you know, and then it goes on to the next, and it all cascades and whatever. So there's a lot of complexity that happens, and all of a sudden a team will take somebody that someone didn't think, and, you know, everybody starts scrambling because it all starts to unravel or ravel. So you're looking for those opportunities.
If you were hired as an information specialist to help a team win, what are the things that you would do?
What I would do is to help them to define their goals, objectives, style, and what was really important to them. Because again, it's not about the technology. It's about the business practices. It's about how we do things. So that would be the first thing. And then I would help to identify the information sources and the reliable information sources that help us to put together information and knowledge on the variables that met those needs. So maybe, for example, if they're talking about how can we design information systems that help us to succeed in the actual game itself. So we would talk about what's the flow of the game, what's the nature, you know, what is allowed and what isn't, and how can we set up systems that give the coaches the information they need during the game to make the best decisions. In the recruiting and the putting the team together, what are the variables that are most important to them? How do we gather that? How do we put together with systems? So the information systems, in a way, the technology becomes invisible, you know, to do that aspect as well.
Coming up next, Laura Schildkraut talks with Tim Ruskell, General Manager and President of Football Operations for the Seattle Seahawks. Their conversation starts with a look at the intense 4-day job interviews that college players experience at the NFL Scouting Combine.
Is there anything that goes on at the Combine that the players might not expect?
I think they become very surprised at how much we're asking them to do and how much time is put into this, and just the intensity and the focus in terms of them. It's never been like that in their whole life. It's a prolonged job interview, like no other job interview, and it's very stressful. And then at the end of that, you're asked to perform at the highest level you can possibly perform, and it's the most important job interview of your life. So it's interesting to see how they handle that stress, but I don't think they're prepared for it, even though they know what's coming.
Why are problem-solving skills so important?
Because you're going to be faced with so much adversity as a player and so many things that you have to overcome, not only individually but as a group. And so you want somebody that can figure out, if I have to make an adjustment during the game, how am I going to do that, and can I implement that, and will it mess up what everybody else on my team is doing? You have to know the people that can push through that and persevere.
So how are hard skills evaluated, like the 40-yard dash or vertical jump or things like that? How do they actually handle that?
Well, we use the measurement of 40 yards, basically. And it's measured against all the players that have come before them, for all the combines, for the years and years that we've taken those numbers. And so by each position and by the height and weight of each player, we know what average, above average, and below average is. And so they're weighed against those numbers from history, and then evaluated against that in terms of where they fit, just on that specific. That is not the end all in terms of evaluating that player. It wouldn't be like track and field, where the that number means everything. But that is part of the process and part of the puzzle.
Do you find that you get different information from the combine and from watching individual workouts?
It is different because the combine's all done on the same surface at the same time with his peers at the same position. Whereas when you go to a college workout, you don't know what it could be windy, it could be outdoors, it could be on a track. Now all the the formulas and the testing that was equal in Indianapolis, all the variables go out the window, and so now you have to almost adjust to it, and now you're playing a different kind of game.
So in preparation for the draft, there's a long list of statistics like completed passes or interceptions thrown that are being collected on some of the players that you're interested in. How do you use those statistics?
They're important, but they're not the most important. I think the number one tool that we have for evaluating players and ultimately making a decision to take them is our one-on-one viewing, either the tape or live games or practices, which we ask our scouts, our coaches, and our front office to do, and then we cross-check each other. The statistics are important because they can give you a quick snapshot of the production of the player, but you have to really go behind the statistics and figure out, well, how did they get to that point? And if the numbers are down, why were they down? Was it the fault of the player, or were the circumstances such that they weren't able to perform to their maximum capability?
And what do you look at beyond those statistics?
We are very much involved with the intangibles of the player, the character, the things that make them tick. Some people call it the makeup of the player. And we spend an inordinate amount of time researching that and studying it and see how it fits with the profile that we're looking for this football team.
How do you determine if a player is going to be a good fit for the team?
Well, again, it's a long process. We have a profile of the type of player we're looking for, not only in terms of his skills, but also in terms of his makeup, as we talked about, his character and his intangibles. And so as we go through the weeding out process, which starts with maybe 2,000 names, and by the time we draft them, there's like 75 players left that we would be interested in taking. Those filters are put through, the players are put through every one of those filters, and it's a weeding out process until we get down to the number that we call our hot list, and they have passed all the tests that we've put before them at that point.
So through this process, you're gathering a lot of information. How do you go about organizing it?
Well, obviously the computer plays a big part in what we do, and all this information is fed in to our computer, and we sort it out by the various lists that we need and the various programs that we need to run during the draft and prior to the draft. All our meetings are, all that information that we have fed in there gets processed and sorted out, and then it comes back to us in a form that we can use it and evaluate each player in a short period of time, but we have all the information right in front of us, and we're not shuffling through various things to try to figure that out. And then we can compare each player, his information, to the next guy, and it's fair, and it's quick, and it's efficient. And all this information that has been put together comes out in a program where we go position by position, player by player, and all the information and all the reports are right there in front of us on a projected screen. And anything that we would want to know about this player after they've read their reports is right there. We can shift and go to different tabs and see what this guy did and compare it to the next guy and the next guy and the next guy. And so it's efficient and it's organized, and nothing really is that we've gathered and that's in the computer isn't right at our disposal when we're trying to make a decision in terms of what kind of grade we're going to put on that guy. It's all right there.
What do you mean, what kind of grade?
Well, we have a 1 to 10 scale that we use for our grading system, and that's based on their ability. And in addition to that, we have a character scale, and that's divided up into two areas: football character and personal character, and those are letter grades. So you have your letter grades, and then you have your 1 to 10 scale, and then after that we have a plus, neutral, and minus system, and that's basically tells us if the player's a fit for the team in terms of the scheme that we run, not necessarily anybody else's scheme, and that would either be a plus, neutral meaning nothing, or a minus. So you have 4 real criteria that you grade the player on in terms of his final grade that goes up on the board. The 2 letter grades, football and personal character, the numerical grade, which is on a 1 to 10 scale, and then the plus or minus system.
Where does instinct fit into that?
Instinct really determines where you're going with that numerical grade. If you have an instinct or a feel, or the scout has an instinct or a feel that this is a starter in the National Football League, that he's going to come in here and in a short period of time be one of the 22 players that starts for you, that will determine where he's going with that grade. He doesn't necessarily have to go by the individual grades that he gives him in terms of the specifics or traits of that player. That final grade gives the scout the opportunity to say, I feel like this guy's going to be a starter. Maybe his numbers don't add up, but that's my feeling. And he can do that in the numerical grade. And obviously we do that in terms of when we put them on our hot list, the red dot that we put on the cards. That's really a feel for all that information put together. Okay, now, do you want him on this football team or don't you? That's an instinct, that's a gut feeling.
On the other side of instinct, how do you measure a player's instinct for the game?
That's a lot of watching of tape, seeing him perform live in games and in practice, and listening to the coaches, because coaches look for that as well, and so they would have a feel for that. But that really comes down to, when you see him on the film, does he look like he anticipates the action on the field rather than just reacts to it? He sees things happening before him, and he makes his decisions based on those things that he's seeing, not after they've happened, but before they happen. That's really, position by position, what you're looking at when you're talking about instincts.
So given the years of experience that you have and the history that you have with this, what information do you find tends to be the most useful in terms of predicting who's going to end up being a great player for you?
I always start with the viewpoint of the scouts. They go on the road. They are there on the campus all day long, sometimes 2 days. They are talking to the coaches. They are interviewing academic advisors. They are talking to all the people that had contact with this player. And they're just really getting a feel for that and going and watching them perform in practice when the camera's not on them. They get the best feel for what this person's all about, what his makeup is, and then how he interacts with his coaches and players. I always, because that's the background that I came from, I'm always going to want to hear that first, and I'm going to lean that way if there is a discrepancy between someone who just saw the tape and somebody who actually spent time with this person. And I think you have to do that.
Is there such a thing as having too much information?
Yes, you can get information overload. You can overanalyze guys. All players have flaws, not only in terms of their character, but in terms of their playing ability. And it seems like the more you talk about them, the more those come to the forefront and you forget all the good things that you like. So you have to be very careful not to overanalyze these guys.
So now you've got this list that's stacked ranked by each of those different criteria. How do you decide who you're actually going to pursue from that list?
Well, the other thing we do in addition to the 2-letter grades and the numerical grade and the plus or the minus is when we're done, we're saying, okay, here's his grade, here's how we feel about his character, here's how we feel about his fit for the team. Is he on our hot list or is he not? And we have a red dot that we put on the cards. And like I said earlier, by the time we're done with that meeting, we have about 70 to 80 players that qualify for the hot list. That means we're going to take them. Regardless of what their grade is, we're going to take them at that grade level in the draft. And we started out with 2,000 names. And by the end, we're down to that 70 or 80 players. So, those are the guys we are going to take.
So once you go in there, you don't really know exactly what's going to end up happening. How many different scenarios have you prepared before other teams start making their decisions?
We have a pretty good feel, with all the mock drafts that get out in the media and all the writers that are able to talk to the various teams. We have a pretty good feel, no matter where you pick in the first round or second round, which players are going to be available that you're interested in. And we go through those scenarios, and then we decide with the scouts and the coaches, okay, if these 4 people are there when we pick, who would be your preference? And let's rank them 1 to 4. And so we do that constantly and continuously, and we go through that leading up to the draft. And very rarely, if you've done your homework correctly and you've gotten the information that you think you need to make up the mock drafts for the first and second round, you really don't get that many surprises. And when it looks like a surprise is going to happen and someone's dropping to you that you didn't anticipate, you try to quickly go back through that again, put him in the scenario and say, okay, if this guy's in there, where does he rank with the other 4 or 5 players? You try not to, if you do your work and you do your preparation, you shouldn't have that many surprises come draft day.
If the draft hasn't filled all your positions, where do you go next?
Well, you also have the college free agency period where those players that were not drafted are able to be signed, and that's usually you're competing against the other 31 teams. So that's another form of free agency where they can hear your spiel, so to speak, and you'll have to offer them some money, and you can fill your needs in terms of positions that way. And you're also still in the middle of NFL free agency, veteran free agency. And so if you've not gotten something done in the draft in terms of a position and you feel like you're weak there, there are usually still some good free agent deals out there to be had after the draft.
Do you find that you put those players through the same level of rigor, at least in your analysis, as you do before the draft?
Well, remember this, most of those guys have gone through a draft. So they had that amount of analysis, and then we can constantly update the information we get from pro teams in terms of how have they been, were they what we thought they were when they got to that team, and why were they let go? You make phone calls, you find out what's happened to that player since you last evaluated him in college.
How do you think information and technology will continue to change this process?
I think it will continue to make it more efficient, and we'll have some of the work we do in terms of our boards and shifting of players, that'll be done quicker with bigger screens and projection type screens, and the amount of information that's in the computers will be able to be processed quicker. You're going to see a real jump in technology in terms of the video. And right now we get tapes sent to us from the colleges, and we have to actually load the tapes like you would a VCR and watch those tapes. Pretty soon those are all going to be on the computer as well, like they are for the pro game, and those will be sent to us immediately, and we will be able to send them out to our scouts, wirelessly, and that will be a real jump in the technology for football.
Thank you for watching Information Matters, a program of the University of Washington Information School. The iSchool supports, facilitates, and enriches human engagement with information and technology. The iSchool helps people find and effectively use the information they need to work, make decisions and choices for their families, and pursue their interests. For more information about the iSchool, visit www.ischool.washington.edu or call 206-685-9937.